This Parsha podcast is dedicated in honor of a brand new couple, our nephew and our new niece, Dovi and Adina Walby. They got married last week in Montreal, and we had the great privilege of participating in their wedding. It was a wonderful wedding, one of the most memorable weddings that I've been to. And on behalf of the Parsha podcast audience, we wish them a hearty mazel tov. And we hope that they build a beautiful Jewish home together and have a wonderful life, replete with all manner of blessing, all manner of happiness and goodness, great health, prosperity, harmony, and joy. And please God, lots and lots of Walby progeny. We are recording from a new venue this week. I'm in the library in Innisfil, Ontario. It's a public library. You gotta love them. And this is not like the central library in downtown Houston, if you know what I mean. It's nice. It's chic. It's clean. It's modern. And they have several study pods that you could reserve for a few hours at a time. These small rooms with sliding glass doors. I'm actually in my third stint of the day. You know, want to get some work done. You gotta come here. And you borrow this room, and even though everyone could see you, and people are looking at me askance as I gesticulate wildly, people are filing to and fro in the library, and they just see right in over here. That's okay. I brought my paraphernalia, my recording devices, my microphone, and even though it's not quite the Torch Center, we're happy to have a quiet venue to record. I will tell you that I'm a bit congested. And my wife gave me some advice. She said, well, maybe you stand while you record. But the truth is, because everyone could just look in, I feel like if I was standing, I would attract even more attention. So forgive me if if I sound a bit congested as I talk. But we're here. Thank God the summer is going well. Everyone's in good shape. The cottage that we're staying at is the most packed it's been. We have the Botniks upstairs and the Walbys, and now the Grumans are here. A lot of people. I don't think the house, the cottage, is more than 1,000 square feet. It's, thank God, bustling with kids, which is wonderful. It's not great for podcast recording or really any quiet time for that matter. And you, as perhaps a fellow introvert, you know how critical it is to have some quiet time. Not complaining. It's been wonderful. But now we're here in the library, and it's time for business. It's time for this week's Parsha podcast. So let's begin. I want to focus on an interesting theme we see several times in our Parsha. It's something that we've addressed in the past tacitly, but I think it's something that is worth examining again and a bit more closely. The Parsha begins right where last week ended off. Last week, the very last event was the zealotry, the act of zealotry of Pinchas. The leader of the tribe of Shimon, he was publicly fornicating with a Midianite princess, and this is an unconscionable scandal, and it sparked a divine fury, and a ferocious plague was sweeping through the nation. And Pinchas, he takes a spear and he's risking his life. He plunges it into the perpetrator and he ends the plague. 24,000 people died, but it ended when Pinchas intervened. And in our Parsha, the eponymous hero gets rewarded handsomely. The Parsha begins, God spoke to Moshe, tell the Jewish people, Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen, Pinchas, son of Elazar, son of Aaron the high priest, he did such wonderful things. He quieted, so to speak, my wrath from upon the nation. He avenged my vengeance. He caused me to not destroy the whole nation in my anger. Had Pinchas not done what he did, it's implied over here, the guy would have continued this plague until the whole nation was destroyed. But Pinchas stopped it. Therefore, declare to all, behold, I am giving him a covenant of peace. Brisi shalom. And it should be for him and for his generations after him, an eternal covenant of priesthood, because he was zealous, because he undertook God's vengeance and atoned for the nation. The Rashi tells us that even though Pinchas is a direct descendant of Aaron, he's a grandson of Aaron, he's the son of Aaron's son Elazar, nevertheless, he was not made a priest, a Kohen. And the reason why is because when the anointing of the priest family happened, he was already alive, and it was only Aaron and his 4 sons and all subsequent sons born to them. But due to his gallantry and valor in this act of zealotry, Pinchas, who was just an ordinary Levite, is now elevated to being a Kohen, and he's granted this covenant of peace and this eternal covenant of the priesthood. Now, what exactly does this mean? So the commentaries, as they always do, they offer a variety of explanations. And one idea we see in the Midrash and in some of the commentaries, they tell us that Pinchas was granted immortality. He was given a covenant of peace and non-aggression with the angel of death. Most of us, all of us, most likely, will have an encounter with the angel of death. We're not here forever. We are mortal. And we're going to die, as unpleasant as that is to hear. But Pinchas, he's given an eternal covenant. He has this peace accord, this treaty, this pact with the angel of death. He is going to live forever. And in fact, our sages tell us that Pinchas is known by another name. He has an alter ego. He is Elijah the prophet. They are, in fact, the same person. And Elijah the prophet, we know he didn't die. He ascended to heaven in a chariot of fire. And there are numerous instances in the literature when Elijah appeared to people hundreds of years after his ascent to heaven. He has visitations that he has with the sages. If you are righteous and worthy and meritorious enough, you can be a recipient of a visitation from Elijah. There are dozens of instances in the Talmud documenting visitations that Elijah had with the great sages. And this is not something which is limited to antiquity. Even in modern times, there are visitations of Elijah to the great sages. In fact, the last documented sighting was with Rabbi Elia Lopian, who passed away in 1970. And undoubtedly there have been many more appearances. But the kind of person that's worthy of having a visitation from Elijah is not the chatty type. They don't come onto podcasts and tell of their exploits. They're reticent to publicize it. So Elijah is still alive. He never died. And Elijah is just another name for Pinchas. And why did he merit to never die? Because of this eternal covenant of peace. So obviously there's a very significant reward for Pinchas's bravery and zealotry. Now us, with our modern sensibilities, we may have a hard time trying to come to terms with what Pinchas did. We have a hard time reconciling with his behavior. When I was thinking about this, I remembered many years ago, I did a series of podcasts that were questions and answers. And one of the questions was Pinchas a psychopath? Because what he did, it seems outrageous. Just without any warning, there's no judge, there's no jury. He's just the executioner comes and he kills 2 people. No, I didn't listen to the podcast. It was from August of 2014. I'm scared to listen to it. The quality of the audio must be dreadful, no doubt. But the truth is, it's not only us that may struggle with coming to terms with understanding what Pinchas did. Rashi tells us that the tribes were ridiculing Pinchas for what he did. In the second verse of our Parsha, chapter 25, verse 11, it tells us, Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen. Pinchas, son of Elazar, son of Aaron, the high priest. And Rashi asks the question, wait a minute, we already know who Pinchas is. Because 4 verses earlier, chapter 25, verse 7, he's already identified, when the verse says that Pinchas, the son of Elazar, the son of Aaron, the high priest, he saw and he got up and he took the spear and so on, and he went and he did what he did. So if 4 verses ago we're told who Pinchas is, Pinchas, son of Elazar, son of Aaron, the high priest, why do we need to identify him again, Pinchas, son of Elazar, son of Aaron, the high priest? So Rashi tells us that after Pinchas did what he did, the tribes, they were mocking him. They were ridiculing him. And they were saying, did you see this son of Putiel? His grandfather, from his mother's side, his maternal grandfather. His paternal grandfather is Aaron, but his maternal grandfather is Jethro. And Jethro used to be an idolater. And he wasn't just an ordinary idolater. He was mad about idolatry. And he would take the calves and he would fatten them so they're really juicy. And only then would he offer them as a sacrifice to the idols. He wasn't just an ordinary run-of-the-mill idolater. He took it very seriously. And look what his grandson is doing. His grandson came and killed the leader of the tribe of Shimon. That's what the tribes were saying about Pinchas after he did what he did. Therefore, the verse comes and attributes him to Aaron. So Rashi's answer to the question of why the genealogy of Pinchas is repeated, he's telling us that we're not just identifying the person, we're identifying the provenance of his behavior. When he did what he did, this was a manifestation of his grandfather, not Jethro, the calf fattener of idolatry, but of Aaron, the high priest. So he's a biological grandson of Aaron, but that's not just merely his parentage. It's not just his pedigree. That connection that he has with Aaron exhibited itself in his behavior. He was a descendant of Aaron, not just who was on his family tree, but his behavior was Aaron-like. And this is the theme that we see first in a Parsha here once, and later on as well, the idea of the heritability of character. Aaron had a certain character type. He was someone who loved peace and pursued peace. And his grandson has a covenant of peace, because his grandson exhibits the same characteristics of Aaron. Character is heritable, for good and for bad. The tribes claimed that Pinchas, he's channeling his grandfather Jethro when he was an idolater. And the reason why, they claimed, the reason why Pinchas slaughtered a head of a tribe of the nation is because he's acting like Jethro would act. Jethro before he had his turnaround, of course. And the Torah says, no, you have it wrong. The Torah claims otherwise. The Torah says he is indeed channeling his grandfather, but not that one, not Jethro. Rather, he's channeling the peace-loving quality of Aaron. So the tribes are misattributing Pinchas's zealotry. They thought he's channeling his grandfather Jethro when he's still a calf fattener, and the Torah comes and corrects the record and attributes him to Aaron. But this idea, the meta idea over here, is that everyone agrees that Pinchas's act was a manifestation of a quality, of an attribute of his antecedents. And the only dispute is which branch of the family is at play here. And the Torah identifies Pinchas in this context as the grandson of Aaron the high priest. Aaron's qualities, his peace-loving, his peace-promoting attributes, those are the qualities that are being manifested by Pinchas when he did his act of zealotry. And thus, Pinchas is not only biologically a grandson of Aaron, his behavior, his character, his ideals, his values, his personality, his righteousness is also Aaronic. It's also like Aaron. Character is heritable. Children exhibit the characteristics of their antecedents. Now this appears again in the Parsha in the episode of the daughters of Tzalafchad. You recall the story, chapter 27. Tzalafchad dies. We actually talked about him a few weeks ago. Tzalafchad may have been the one who was gathering twigs on Shabbos. But his daughters, they come and they want to inherit his ancestral lands in the Holy Land. And they're given quite a lengthy introduction. The daughters of Tzalafchad. Tzalafchad, the son of Hefer, the son of Gilad, son of Machir, son of Menashe. To the families of Menashe, the son of Joseph. There are lots of generations being presented here. It's the daughters of Tzalafchad, who is the son of Hefer, who is the son of Gilad, who is the son of Machir, who is the son of Menashe, who is the son of Joseph. And they stand up before Moshe and before Elazar the high priest and before the princes and the whole nation, and they tell the whole story. Our father died in the wilderness, and why should we lose out? He had no sons, but maybe the daughters can inherit his lands in the event that he is no longer with us. And indeed, Moshe consults with God, and the law is thus established and told to us that in the event that a man has no male heirs, his daughters inherit his ancestral lands in the land of Canaan. But there's a very lengthy attribution. And again, Rashi asks the question, like, well, why do we be told so many generations? We have daughters of Tzalafchad, that's one. Son of Hefer, that's two. Son of Gilad is 3, son of Machir is 4, son of Menashe is 5, son of Joseph is 6. That's a lot of generations to go back just to give us the background, the pedigree of the daughters of Tzalafchad. So Rashi asks the question, why do we have to attribute them all the way back to Joseph? This, Rashi tells us, is showing us that they were like Joseph. Joseph, he was someone who cherished the land. When he was about to pass, he was very concerned that his bones will be taken out of the land of Egypt and be interred in the Holy Land. The priority that he had at the end of his life was that he is buried in the land. He had a desire. He loved the land. He cherished the land. And now, his great-great-great-great-granddaughters, they are so desirous of having a portion of the land, and that's why they're coming to Moshe with their quest, with their request to have their father's ancestral lands. It's not just because they want land, like anyone wants to be a landowner, because they love the land so much they want to have a permanent foothold in the land. Their request, Rashi tells us, that's an expression of the Josephine love of the land. His qualities, Joseph's attributes, they filtered down his bloodline, and now it's 6 generations later, and the same qualities, the same love of the land is being manifested by his descendants. They're not only biological descendants of Joseph, they're like him in their love of the land. And there are countless examples of this idea. It's one of the big ideas in the Torah, that a person's qualities and attributes, and flaws as well, by the way, as we shall see, for good and for bad, they become part of the genetic package that they pass on to their descendants. So I'll give you another example. In next week's Parsha, we read about the saga of the tribes of Reuven and Gad. Perhaps you recall this. They're on the east bank of the Jordan. They conquer the lands of Sichon and Og. And 2 tribes, 2.5 it ultimately turns out, they want to remain on the east bank of the Jordan. Why don't they want to cross over and inherit the lands on the west bank of the Jordan? So the verse tells us a few reasons. It says that they had a lot of flock and they needed lots of grassy lands to give their flock grazing space. In the end of the Torah, read how the tribe of Gad, wanted to have the burial spot of Moshe in their lands. But there's an amazing midrash that I saw. The Reubenites, descendants of Reuven, the eldest son of Jacob, they wanted their lands on the east bank of the Jordan because they were like their antecedent, Reuben, the actual son of Jacob. Now, what do we know about Reuben, the son of Jacob? One of the episodes we're told about Reuben is that this is in chapter 30 of Genesis. Very interesting callback. He went out in the time of the harvest of the wheat. He went out into the fields and he gathered some dudaim. What are dudaim? These are some sort of herbs or plants that were believed to promote fertility. And he gave them to his mother Leah because she had ceased having children. And then we know the story. Rachel asked for some of the dudaim and Leah seems to get really angry. You took my husband, now you want to take also my dudaim, and they make an agreement that Jacob will be with you tonight. We know that story. But the verse tells us, chapter 30, verse 14 of Genesis, that Reuven went in the time of the harvesting of the wheat, and he found dudaim in the field. So, of course, the Torah does not tell us any extra unnecessary filler material. Reuven went in the time of the harvesting of the wheat, and he found dudaim, these plants, these herbs, whatever they are. He found them in the field. And somehow this has to do with the decision or the desire of his descendants, the tribe of Reuven, to now want to settle on the east bank of the Jordan. What's the possible connection? So the Midrash elaborates that at the time of the harvest of the wheat, well, the wheat's been harvested, right? So before the harvest time, people are very nervous about others coming in, any intruders to their field because the crop has yet to be harvested. But once harvest season is over, well, now the fields are empty. There's no longer any grain there. So people are much more okay with other people trampling in their fields. But nevertheless, where did Reuven find the dudaim? Basada, in the field, meaning not in anyone's field, in a ownerless part of the land. And this, the Pinchas tells us, this demonstrates the fastidiousness that Reuven had to not steal someone else's land or produce. Even though it's after harvesting season and people are much more relaxed and okay and tolerant of people coming to their fields, nevertheless, he went to no man's land to not touch someone else's stuff. He had meticulousness to not steal from anyone anything. And now his descendants say, we want to settle on lands on the east bank of the Jordan, away from the rest of the nation where there's loads and loads of grazing area. We want to be isolated to avoid any accidental theft when our animals are grazing. This quality that Reuven had, to be extra fastidious and careful to not, God forbid, steal from anyone, even if maybe they wouldn't mind, that's what prompted his descendants, that quality, that scrupulousness, That's what prompted the Reubenites to seek permanent settlement on the east bank of the Jordan. Again, the idea, the qualities of the antecedent are manifested in their descendants even many generations hence. Another example, the kingly qualities of Judah. Judah, of course, that's the tribe of the monarchy. King David comes from the tribe of Judah. And the Midrash asks the question, why does Judah, of all the tribes, why do they merit the monarchy? And the Midrash offers 4 different reasons. Judah admitted guilt in the episode of Tamar. Reason number 1. That's a kingly quality. Judah intervened and saved Joseph when his brothers wanted to kill him. That's a kingly quality. Judah offered to be imprisoned instead of Benjamin after Joseph's goblet was discovered in Benjamin's satchel. Nachshon, the head of the tribe of Judah, he leapt into the waters, prompting the splitting of the sea. The attributes, even though this is not when the monarchy is established, these are qualities featured in Judah and his descendants. These are qualities of a king. If you look at all these examples, the common denominator is that they take responsibility. This is the quality of Judah, and thus the tribe members of Judah, they're best suited for being leaders. Same idea. Character passes with a person's genetic package that they give to their descendants. And this is featured in the negative as well. Perhaps you recall the memorable midrash about what happened when the Almighty offered the Torah to the Jewish people. Before he offered it to us, he offered it to the other nations. And the midrash tells us that he went to Esav, the nation of Edom, and he went to Ishmael, and he offered them the Torah. And in each instance, the prospective recipient of the Torah asked for some details. Let me know what's included in the Torah. And in each instance, the Almighty told the prospective nation the particular part of Torah that violates that nation's essence. So when God went to the descendants of Esav, do you want the Torah? Sure, what's in it? It says, thou shalt not murder. Well, us not to murder? This is our passion. This is our pastime. Don't you know what it says about Esav? Esav, it says, the hands are the hands of Esav. Al char b'chotichi, you should live upon your sword. That's our quality. We're not compatible with Torah. Went to Ishmael. Do you want the Torah? Sure, what's in it? Don't steal. No, that's not possible. Yado bakol v'yakol bo. It says about Ishmael, his hand is everywhere. He just can't keep his hands to himself. That quality was present in Ishmael, and his descendants, they still exhibit that quality. The nations of Ammon and Moab, who were conceived when Lot spent those nights in the cave with his daughters, you recall. What's in the Torah? Don't do any adultery. Don't do any sexual miscreancy. We can't do that. That's our essence. That is our nation. That's the pattern. Every nation was offered the Torah, and they asked for the details, and God responded with precisely the mitzvah, the quality that's their Achilles heel. And they all passed. And for that reason, I'm out. And the subtext of this is that the flaws and the shortcomings that were featured in the original founder of those nations, they're still present in their descendants generations later. The flaws of Lot and his daughters and Ammon and Moab are present many generations hence. And Esav's nasty qualities are present in his descendants, and Ishmael's, and so on. That is perpetuated. Good character and bad character is heritable. The aforementioned Ammonite and Moabite nations were told in the book of Devarim, which we're almost up to. As crazy as that is to think about, it's year 8 of the Parsha podcast. And we're on the penultimate Parsha podcast of the book of Numbers. We're almost by the end. How fortunate are we that we've gone so far in the Parsha podcast on year 8. But in the book of Devarim, we read about the Ammonite and Moabite nations, that they may not intermarry amongst our people even if they convert. And the reason why is because they lack kindness. And they lack appreciation and gratitude. And this behavior is so deep-rooted in the fabric of this nation that they are permanently barred from entering the people. We don't want their genetics to be part of our nation. You recall, perhaps, when Abraham was seeking a spouse for Isaac, he hires Eliezer, go find a spouse, but not a Canaanite. Same idea. Canaanites, they're cursed. They have contemptible qualities, and there's no way that they can be compatible with this nation. Now, this principle, I think it's a very central element of what it means to be a nation, and certainly what it means to be part of our nation, of our people. When we say that, we're a Jewish nation, we have certain characteristics, certain predispositions. What does that mean? What does it mean to be a Jew? It means to exhibit the qualities of Abram, Isaac, and Jacob, of the forebears of our nation. We've mentioned this idea many times throughout the more than 1,500 episodes that have come out of the Torch Center and the various satellite locations where we record. In chapter 5 of the book of Pirkei Avos, we have successive Mishnahs that talk about Abraham. The first one says there are 10 generations from Noah to Abraham. That's the genealogy. Count the generations from Noah to Abraham, it's 10. In the very next Mishnah, it talks about the 10 tests of Abraham. But unlike the Mishnah talking about the genealogy, it doesn't identify him as Abraham. It doesn't say Abraham was tested with 10 tests. It says Abraham, our father, Avraham Avinu, was tested with 10 tests. It's the same person. It's Abraham. But in one Mishnah, he's called Abraham. And in the second Mishnah, he's called Abraham, our father. Why does he have a different name? And there's a famous idea featured in the Ruach Chaim commentary to the book of Pirkei Avos, where he says that in Abraham's 10 tests, he is our father. In those spiritual triumphs, our relationship to him is genetic. Those triumphs of Abraham, when he successfully overcame the 10 tests, the 10 trials, those qualities that he earned along the way, they became part of what he gave us. We inherited those qualities. He bequeathed those qualities to us. Whatever he did is embedded within us. Abraham's 10 trials, it changed him, but it became something of a spiritual epigenetics that were passed on to us. And thus, if Abraham, he was willing to risk everything to go to the land of Israel, we have a certain attribute, a desire, a yearning, a pining to go to the land. Abraham was willing to face a threat to his life. He was willing to absorb martyrdom in order to stand up for what he believed. That quality has been manifested by his descendants millions of times since then. Why are we so brave to give up our lives for our faith? It's because we have the qualities of Abraham coursing throughout our veins. There's a fascinating and tragic story featured in the Talmud in the book of Gittin on page 57b. The Talmud is recording and recounting the horrific and tragic events that surrounded the destruction of the Second Temple, which of course happened during this part of the year. In a couple of weeks, we'll have the fast of Tisha B'Av, which is the day of the destruction of the temple. It tells a story of the horrific atrocities perpetrated by one of the Roman leaders. It calls him a Caesar. It's not clear if it's the same Caesar, which Caesar it is, but it's some events that happened in the times of the destruction of the temple. It tells of a righteous woman who had 7 sons. And they were summoned to the Caesar, to the Roman leader. And they brought in the first son and says, well, I want you to worship the idol. The Romans, they were obsessed with idolatry. According to Roman sources, they had more than 30,000 gods. They were pagans of the first order. And of course, the Jews, they believed in, and they still do believe in, one invisible, all-powerful, omnipotent, omniscient God. So they always tried to get the Jews to do idolatry. So they bring in the first son, do idolatry. He says, no. The Torah says, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, only one God. They killed him. And the second son, worship idolatry. No. The Torah says, thou shalt not have any other gods before me. They killed him as well. The third son, do the idolatry. No. The Torah says that you cannot sacrifice to any other god. Again, there are many verses in the Torah that talk about idolatry. And each son is invoking a different verse in the Torah as to why this is totally unconscionable. And son after son after son is being killed. Until there was only one son left. And the Roman, he's genociding the whole family here. And he tells the youngest son, listen, I'm not going to make you do idolatry. I'm going to throw down my signet ring. I'm going to put it on the floor. And you just bow before me and pick up that seal. So people will think that you're bowing to me. You're not really bowing to me. Okay, I want to go easy on you. Let's spare one son from this family. I'll just throw it down. You pick up the ring, pretend like you're bowing down before me, and we'll send you home. And he responds. He says, you're the Caesar, you're the Roman leader. I'm going to honor you, and I'm going to be scared of you. I have to honor God way more than you. Who are you compared to God? I'm not going to even give the impression that I'm bowing before you. And the last son of this family was killed. And the epilogue of this story is that before the son was taken away to be killed, his mother gave a message. And she said to him, after they kill you and you're ushered into heaven, I want you to go to Abraham. Go to Abraham and tell Abraham, you took one of your sons and bound him to the altar. That's, of course, the binding of Isaac episode. Tell him, says the mother, I sent 7 of my sons. I bound 7 of my sons to 7 altars. And the story ends, tragic and heroic story, that this woman also died. And after this whole family was wiped out, a prophetic voice boomed, quoting the verse in scripture, Psalms 113 verse 9, Aim habanim smecha, a joyful mother of sons. It's, of course, an awful and tragic and heroic story. Each son was executed, was murdered, each one voicing a different reason as to why they will not capitulate to idolatry. But the punchline of the story, the mother says to her son, go tell Abraham, my sacrifice was greater than his sacrifice. This seems a bit problematic. Is this woman gloating? Is this the appropriate attitude to tell Abraham, I'm better than you? You think you've given up something? I give up even more? The commentaries tell us no. She's saying something different entirely. She's sending the message to Abraham. Abraham, your martyrdom, that quality that you imbued within your descendants, it's still strong. It's still unshakable. Dozens of generations, more than 1,500 years later. Abraham's qualities are so firmly entrenched in his descendants. Those characteristic traits are so embedded in our people, they're permanently there. The Talmud tells us that every descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob will have these qualities. Baishanim, Rachmanim, Gomle Chasadim, bashful, merciful, and hospitable. These characteristics identify us because this is what we received from our illustrious antecedents. There's one final example I want to share. I saw this incredible midrash for the first time this week. This is also in the aftermath of the destruction of the temple. The midrash tells us that there was an Athenian. An Athenian came to Jerusalem. And he met a clever Jerusalemite boy. And he said, here's some money. Go buy some eggs and cheese. So he buys the eggs and the cheese and he brings it back to the Greek, to the Athenian. And the Athenian asks the young lad, yeah, we have some cheese. We got this cheese. We got that cheese. Which cheese came from a white goat and which cheese came from a black or spotted goat? Now, that's a tough question because he can't really identify in the cheese what is the color of the mother, so to speak, of the goat that spawned this cheese. So the clever Jerusalemite lad says to the Athenian, here we have eggs. You got this egg and that egg. Which egg came from a white hen, a white chicken, and which one came from a black one? That's the end of the story in the Midrash. Now this, it seems like it's, just a clever rejoinder. It's a sharp zinger. But the commentaries tell us there's a very deep lesson over here. This Athenian, he was challenging our standing as being God's chosen people. He was saying, listen, you guys, this nation used to have real titans. Used to have Abraham. And Abraham, he was infinitely more righteous than his contemporaries, than his peers. The Nimrod, for example. He was the white goat to that black goat. And Isaac, he was the white goat compared to the black goat of Ishmael. And Jacob was way more righteous than Esav. Undeniably so. Moshe is more righteous than Bilam, the counterweight, the Gentile prophet of equal caliber. So you could lay claim to supremacy when you had the white goat versus the black goat, so to speak. But now, you're no better than us. Look at the cheese. Look at the derivatives of those goats. The cheese is the same. There's no way to attribute one cheese from another. They're all the same. So why do you think that you're better than us? And the boy responded, No. We're not cheese. We're eggs. What happens when you have an egg from a white hen versus a black hen? When you look at them before they hatch, they're identical. But if they hatch, you know what will emerge from one? The child, the descendant, the progeny of the white hen will match that of its forebears. It will be white like them. And the black will be black like its forebears. We are eggs, not cheese. We're cheeseless eggs. If you look at the two eggs, they are indistinguishable from each other. They're the same. But what if they crack? What if we hatch them? If we find a way to bring them to life, to allow their essence, their latent potential to shoot forth, the righteousness of our antecedents will be evident to all. This is an idea that we see all over the literature. It appears in our Parsha, Pinchas and Tzalafchad, the daughters of Tzalafchad exhibiting Joseph's qualities, Pinchas exhibiting the qualities of Aaron. And it's, again, found in many, many, many places. And I think it's a very powerful lesson to appreciate. For one, you think about where we are today. What percentage of our brothers and sisters really appreciate what it means to be a descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? What it means to be part of this glorious and eternal nation? What does it mean to be the chosen people, those who are emissaries of God and his ambassadors in the world? It's a very small percentage. And we may feel inclined to just give up on them. But the truth is that they are like this egg. It's raw potential. And it may look indistinguishable, and there may be no signs of Abraham's fingerprints upon them, but there's something within them that's powerful and that's permanent. And if there was a way to just kindle it, to take that tiny ember and fan it to life, the fiery, passionate blaze of Abraham would once again burn brightly. You know, this year 8 of the Parsha podcast, the theme is Dad, deep and deeper. There's another idea that I think it's important for us to really appreciate. Our connection with the Almighty and his Torah, it's genetic. It's hardwired. And there's basically nothing that a Jew can do to sever that. And yes, it may be suppressed. And yes, it may not necessarily be activated. It may be an egg, but it's not cheese. It's there. And it's our mission to do whatever we can to kindle it, to hatch it, to awaken it, of course, within ourselves and within the hearts of our brethren. There's another takeaway from this idea. You think about what your life mission is. What's the quest of our life? What are we after? What are we trying to do? So certainly, when you think about it from the context of the Torah, we're here to improve ourselves, to improve our character, to fix our bad character, to burnish and develop and hone our good character, to do mitzvos, to be righteous, to elevate ourselves. And you think about, well, what's our lifespan here at 70, 80, 90 years, 100 years if we're lucky, and then all that hard work gets buried in the ground. So that's, of course, a bad way to think of it, because even when someone dies, the consequences of their actions are actually much more manifested in their death than it is in their lifetime. And of course, the resurrection is the flowering of what was planted at a person's burial. But even in this world, when a person dies, their qualities don't just die with them. Our qualities on one hand and our flaws on the other hand don't just live and die with us. That's what we pass on to our children. That's what we perpetuate onward to our descendants. And if there's a person who works on developing themselves and improving themselves it will manifest itself in their children. Our self-development, it yields permanent fruit. If we work to improve ourselves, whatever accomplishments we have, that becomes part of the DNA, the epigenetic, the spiritual epigenetics that we transmit onward. Abraham was barren, as we know. Abraham and Sarah were barren. And they only conceived Isaac after Abraham was sacrificed. Isaac was the first child born from a circumcised father. The change that Abraham underwent when he circumcised, that became infused in Isaac. And it had to be like that. I always wonder, thinking about this, if a person has, let's say, children over the course of several years, let's say they start having children when they're 20 and then they retire, or they finish having children when they're 35, 40, or whatever it is. I want to do a study. I'll do a study to compare the qualities and the attributes and the temperament of children born earlier in a person's life versus those born later. Because if a person's improving, well, you would imagine that the subsequent children would be more refined because they're born to a different person, and thus the genetic package that they acquire, that they inherit from their parents, will be more refined. There's yet another point. If we have those qualities that our antecedents, so of course, Abram, Isaac, and Jacob, and their illustrious spouses, and the great tribes, and all the great giant sages and righteous people that have been part of our line over the course of the millennia, they worked really hard to acquire those qualities. We have to not only acquire qualities of our own, we have to preserve those qualities. We're holding gems in our hands. Gems that generations of our antecedents worked really, really hard to earn and to perfect and to polish. We have to make sure that we do whatever we can to preserve that and to pass it forth. Just as a responsible parent is not going to smoke or drink or do drugs while pregnant because it's going to harm the child, if this is true, if this idea, the heritability of character is true, as good parents, we have to do whatever we can to not harm our children's spiritual lives. As we become more righteous, more elevated, more refined, that will translate to our children becoming more righteous, more elevated, more refined as well. And because we're bearing all of that hard work of our antecedents, we have to preserve it as well. We are responsible for the whole world. Why are we responsible? Where did I sign? This is what Abraham did for us. And that, you think about that, they used to call it the guardians of the galaxy. We're the ones who are going to determine what's going to be with all of humanity. It's a lot of responsibility. But it's, of course, very invigorating and empowering. We have to do whatever we can to maintain that, to preserve that, and to transmit that forward. A child at 8 days old has a circumcision and forges this bond of closeness with God. What do you do to earn that? Nothing. But the spirit of Abraham exists within you. We have to preserve that. We have to perpetuate that forward. Pinchas is a grandson of Aaron. And that's why he's a priest. I had a conversation with Rabbi Botnick last night. I said, Rabbi Botnick, you're better than me because you're a Kohen and I'm just an ordinary Israelite. And he says, no, I'm not better. But the truth is he is better. Why is he better? Because he comes from Aaron and I don't, even though I do come from Aaron, but not a direct line. Think about it. It's been 100 generations. There must have been someone there that was a Kohen, right? He has the Y chromosome of Aaron. And what does that mean? It's not just the quality that Aaron had and then the kids just start off with nothing. It means that this quality of what made Aaron a priest and thus towering above everyone else, as, of course, Korach learned the hard way, that quality is still part of the genetic makeup of his descendants. Just as Pinchas exhibited Aaron's characteristics, the daughters of Tzalafchad were like Joseph, and we are all like our illustrious forebears. Sometimes we may not realize that. Sometimes we just need to hatch a little bit. It's not pleasant maybe to hatch, I would imagine. Sometimes we don't see it, but it's there. And we should do whatever we can to develop that, to unearth that, to maybe crack through the cocoon that maybe keeps us small, but it's there. And there's nothing, almost nothing we can do to get rid of it. And we have to make sure that we preserve it and perpetuate it. May we all be so fortunate as to be worthy of living up to the qualities that we all have within us. And never, of course, never give up on our brethren. I appreciate your attention. This was delightful. I did have some people here passing by and looking at me askance with my microphone here in pod number 1 of the Innisfil Public Library. But that's okay. That's okay. I enjoyed it immensely. I hope you did it as well. Send me an email if you like it. If you don't like it, doesn't matter. RabbiWolbachim.com. Have a wonderful day. A splendid rest of your week. How does it go? And a sensational, terrific, outstanding Shabbos upcoming. And please God, with the unending help of the Almighty, we'll talk again next week on the Parsha podcast. My name is Yaakov Wolbe. It's nice to meet you virtually. Send me an email, rabbiwolbe@gmail.com.